After a stadium kiss cam exposed his wife in the wrong arms, billionaire Andrew Cabot answered the scandal without a single word, through action. No statements, no interviews, just a precise chain of moves that rattled boardrooms, upended careers, and flipped the narrative overnight. From whispers of a Japan business trip to a sudden corporate reset, we'll trace the quiet power plays that changed everything, and why the silence may have been the loudest message of all. It started with a song and a spotlight that refused to move. One moment, the crowd at Gillette Stadium was singing along, and the next, the kiss cam locked onto a pair who didn't look ready for prime time. She smiled first. He hesitated. Then came the kind of hug that tries to look innocent and lands somewhere between awkward and undeniable. The stadium didn't boo. It held its breath. People noticed the details, the stiff shoulders, the quick glance off screen, the way they seemed to negotiate the moment instead of enjoying it. Even the band's frontman tossed a playful line that made the crowd laugh and made the internet sharpen its knives. 10 seconds became a story. 20 seconds became a theory. By the end of the song, it was a scandal with a soundtrack. Phones went up in a wave, clips hit feeds before the chorus finished. The caption writers didn't even need to try. Kiss Cam did the heavy lifting. Within minutes, the video was everywhere at once. TikTok edits, split-screen breakdowns, frame-by-frame replays pausing on every glance, every twitch, every almost kiss. Some called it harmless. Most didn't. Because nothing looks harmless when it's blown up on a jumbotron and multiplied across a million screens. What made it hit harder was context. The crowd didn't have, but the internet did. These weren't two random strangers. They were executives, high profile, close colleagues, married, but not to each other. That combination turned a stadium gag into a boardroom problem, and the clip's comments read less like jokes and more like deposition notes. Every angle felt like evidence. Every replay felt like confirmation. The moment didn't end when the camera cut away. It followed them down the aisles, out of the stadium, and straight into Monday morning. You could feel it in the way people posted, not with curiosity, but with certainty. The tone wasn't, "Did that just happen?" It was, "We all saw it." And once a story gets told in that voice, it doesn't go back in the bottle. The band moved on to the next song. The crowd went back to singing. But the damage had already been uploaded. What began as a stadium bit had become something else entirely. Public, permanent, and impossible to walk off. And what happened after the lights went down was even messier. Within hours, the faces had names. The man wasn't a random concert date. He was Andy Byron, a tech CEO with investors watching every move. The woman wasn't a mystery fan. She was Kristin Cabot, a senior HR leader, the person who writes the rulebook and enforces it. Titles changed the clip from gossip to governance. That pairing is why the moment exploded. HR isn't just another department. It guards policy, handles complaints, and decides consequences. When the guardian of the rules appears entangled with the boss, the internet doesn't see romance. It sees a conflict of interest. It sees risk. It sees a company that could be forced to answer hard questions under bright lights. There was another layer that made it sting. Both were reportedly married, but not to each other. That detail turned a viral video into a reputational wildfire. Suddenly, the comments weren't jokes. They read like exhibits. People weren't arguing about whether a hug meant anything. They were asking who reported to whom, who approved what, and what the handbook actually says. Inside any company, that combo, CEO plus HR, sets off alarms. Compliance, ethics, fiduciary duty, employees notice, boards notice, regulators notice. It's not just about feelings, it's about power. Who could influence promotions? Who could bury complaints? Even if nothing improper happened at work, the appearance alone can corrode trust. That's why the stadium moment mattered far beyond the seats. The titles over the faces rewired the story. It stopped being a messy night out and became a case study in corporate exposure. A 20-second clip now had shareholders, attorneys, and inside counsel in the audience. By the next morning, the stakes were obvious. Leave it to spin and the narrative eats the company. Confront it fast and maybe the damage gets contained. Astronomer had to pick a lane, ignore it and bleed, or move decisively and brace for impact. But that wasn't the whole story. By sunrise, the clip wasn't just trending, it was on an agenda. Phones lit up, calendars cleared, and a board that usually plans quarters started planning hours. The first move was classic playbook. Place both executives on administrative leave, lock down access, and bring in outside counsel. Not because guilt was proven, but because governance demands daylight. Inside the company, an all hands wasn't called, but the message still arrived. A short internal memo hit inboxes, thin on adjectives and thick on verbs. Investigate, cooperate, disclose. Compliance spun up interviews. IT pulled logs. HR, minus its head, issued its own statement about boundaries and reporting lines. It wasn't theater, it was containment. Titles changed everything. When the CEO and the HR chief are the subjects, every decision gets audited twice. Who signed what? Who reported to whom? Where power could tilt policy. Even if no rule was technically broken, the appearance could break trust. That's why legal moved fast and communications moved faster. Separate the people from the position before the brand took the hit. Then came the exits. First a leave, then a resignation. Another resignation followed. Each announcement arrived with the same restrained language. No adjectives, no color, just dates and titles. An interim leader, co-founder Pete DeJoy, stepped in with the promise every company makes on a bad Monday. Steady hands, clear process, business as usual. Employees didn't clap, they exhaled. Web pages changed quietly. Bios disappeared. Org charts refreshed without ceremony. Vendors asked careful questions. Customers wanted guardrails, not gossip. The company answered with policies, not personality, code of conduct, conflict checks, reporting channels, and a reminder that rules matter most when it's uncomfortable to enforce them. Externally, statements stayed surgical. No moral lectures, no clapbacks. Just the mechanics of accountability. Investigation initiated, leadership transition executed, operations continuing. It read cold on purpose. In the middle of a storm, warmth gets misread as spin. Precision travels better. None of this made the memes stop. But it did slow the bleeding where it counts, with people who sign contracts and renew agreements. The message was simple. Whatever happened on a stadium screen, the company still has a desk, a policy, and a plan. While astronomers scrambled to stabilize the enterprise, one question kept echoing outside its walls. What would Andrew Cabot do, if he did anything at all? Before the memes and the headlines, he was the operator behind a quiet success story. Andrew Cabot built his name in the world of craft spirits, steering a Massachusetts rum brand with the patience of a distiller. Measured inputs, long horizons, no shortcuts. He wasn't a celebrity CEO. He didn't chase panels or flood podcasts. He let product, process, and performance do the talking. Old New England names come with gravity, and his does more than most. The Cabot surname sits in Boston lore like granite. Commerce, ships, ledgers, legacy. That history doesn't give you a pass. It gives you expectations, discretion, composure, the kind of manners that make noise without making a scene. Andrew leaned into that. No theatrics, no public feuds, just outcomes. At work, colleagues describe a rhythm, gather facts, set timelines, and cut clean when the data says so. It's not icy, it's industrial. Barrels don't care about feelings. Supply chains don't respond to gossip. You pick standards and you hold them, even when it stings, especially when it stings. His public footprint matches the temperament. Sparse interviews, minimal social presence. A brand that sells on quality control and consistency rather than founders as influencers. That's rare in a market addicted to personalities. It also means that when chaos hits, there's already a habit of staying off the microphone. Privately, the profile reads traditional, work first, circle tight, privacy guarded. The trappings exist, sure, but the posture is conservative. Build, protect, repeat. If you were drafting a character who could take a global humiliation and answer it with a spreadsheet, you'd write him. That's why the stadium clip hit harder than a random tabloid sting. It didn't just test a marriage, it tested a method. Could a man who runs on discipline and delayed gratification stay disciplined when the internet demanded a spectacle? Could he keep the silence that built his business when silence looked like weakness? He did what he's always done. He kept his counsel and moved in sequence. No open letters, no comment wars, no pity tour. In a culture that begs for confessions and clapbacks, choosing not to feed the machine reads less like absence and more like strategy. Because for Andrew, the currency isn't posts, it's control. Control of narrative, of assets, of future options. Talk fast and you lose leverage. Move first and you don't have to explain. And when the clip finally crossed the ocean and reached him, that's exactly what he did. He moved, quietly, deliberately, and in a way that made no comment feel like the sharpest comment of all. But the Japan detail mattered, and it changed how the next 48 hours unfolded. He was 12 time zones away when the clip detonated. Business dinners, factory tours, polite bows, then a phone vibrating with the kind of message that rearranges a life. He didn't rush to microphones. He didn't post a Notes app confession. He finished the meetings he couldn't move, made the calls that mattered, and stayed quiet long enough to think instead of react. Silence here wasn't absence. It was control. Flights were booked without fanfare, no entourage, no airport theatrics, just a direct route from strategy to consequence. While the internet demanded a statement, he drafted a plan. Advisors first, not audiences. Calendar blocks that looked like logistics but read like boundaries. The point wasn't to win comments, it was to protect the ground under his feet. When he landed, there were no speeches. There were lists. What's his, what's hers, what's shared, what's over. People talk about rage as a response. He chose rules. Clean separations where possible, hard lines where necessary, access rechecked, accounts reviewed. Counsel looped in to keep feelings from spilling into filings. The moves weren't loud, but they were legible to anyone who's seen a high net worth crisis handled by grown-ups. The restraint felt almost defiant. In a culture that confuses noise with strength, he chose the old playbook. Speak seldom, act quickly, leave records, not quotes. That's why the return read as power, not passivity. He didn't try to rewrite what millions had watched. He worked on what he could still control: assets, exposure, and the next 2 weeks of his life. By the end of that first quiet weekend, the story had split in two. Online, a frenzy of edits and accusations. Offline, a sequence of signatures, notices, and updated permissions that said more than any press release ever could. And if you followed the paperwork instead of the posts, you saw the real plotline forming: homes, mortgages, profiles, and positions shifting in a way that was impossible to miss. Follow the filings, not the feeds. That's where the real story started to harden. Property records told a quieter tale than TikTok, but a clearer one. Earlier this year, a house in Rye, New Hampshire, roughly the price of a small fundraise, showed up under their names. The number attached to it wasn't subtle. Neither was the timing. On paper, it looked like a long-term bet on a life that had just been edited in real time on a stadium screen. Money leaves fingerprints. So do loans. Reports circulated about a 7-figure mortgage layered onto that home. The kind of structure that makes sense for tax planning and liquidity, but turns brutal when a marriage hits the rocks. The internet read it like a scoreboard. In private, lawyers read it like a roadmap. Who owns what, who owes what, and which signatures could be frozen without a press release. Then the web pages started changing. Corporate bios that used to be a Google away went dim. Board lists refreshed. Headshots disappeared. The LinkedIn breadcrumb trail that once charted a career suddenly flattened into a blank page. Instagram, the family scrapbook for the algorithm age, went quiet or vanished. It wasn't a speech. It was a silence you could measure. Some of this was confirmed in filings and archives. Some of it lived in screenshots and seen earlier today notes from people who watch this stuff for sport. That's the hazard of a viral scandal. Truth and speculation sprint side by side, and if you don't separate them, you end up repeating fan fiction as fact. So the rule here is simple. Call the records records and label the rumors as rumors. Still, even with caution, the pattern was impossible to miss. Assets defined, access adjusted, affiliations erased. If the stadium moment was theater, the next weeks were a ledger. You could almost hear the clicks: remove, revoke, replace. And for a public hungry for emotion, the paperwork felt colder than any apology could ever be. But while the documents stacked up, the internet did what the internet always does: turned chaos into content, views into currency, and a stadium clip into a cottage industry. The clip didn't just trend, it spawned an industry. 10 seconds of awkward intimacy became raw material for thousands of edits, stitches, and reaction videos. Freeze frames turned into punchlines. Slow motion replays turned into evidence. The internet doesn't wait for context, it makes content. Creators moved fast. Some cropped the moment and added courtroom-style captions. Others layered pop tracks and turned it into a dance meme. A few ran frame-by-frame breakdowns like sports analysts, circling hands, zooming on eyes, timing the hug to the beat. Every version found its audience. Attention is the algorithm's favorite fuel, and this fire had oxygen to spare. Then came the cottage industry around the cottage industry. Commentary channels rolled out what really happened narratives. HR TikTok weighed in with policy takes. Finance bros did back-of-the-napkin valuations on brand damage. Even body language analysts joined the pile-on, reading posture like deposition testimony. It wasn't gossip anymore, it was a content category. Money followed the traffic. The original filmer described a revenue pop from platform bonuses and creator funds. Re-uploaders chased their own cuts with clever captions and credit-to-owner hedges. Compilation accounts jammed the clip between fail videos and celebrity outtakes to keep viewers from swiping away. In a week, the moment had sponsors, CPMs, and an ecosystem. With scale comes error. Misidentifications started surfacing, wrong names, wrong job titles, lookalikes tagged for clout. That's when corrections appeared. Corporate statements warning of fake accounts, posts urging people to stop doxing, reminders that not every source is a source. The river didn't stop, but it hit some rocks. The memes hardened the narrative. One version cast it as a rom-com gone wrong. Another made it a lesson in corporate hypocrisy. The most viral angle framed it as a case study in power. A CEO and an HR chief on a screen they couldn't control turned into content by a crowd that could. The public decided before any investigation finished because virality closes the book long before facts do. Meanwhile, the platforms did their usual dance: promote, throttle, recommend, repeat. The clip jumped borders, languages, and time zones. By day 3, people who didn't know the company or the band knew the moment. It had a life beyond the people in it. For the principals, every meme was a reminder. For the audience, every meme was new entertainment. The asymmetry is brutal. The internet gets amusement, the subjects get aftermath. That's the economy. Views are currency, and someone always pays in a different coin. Yet beneath the jokes and the monetization tricks, another story took shape. A husband who didn't post, a businessman who didn't play to the crowd. While creators added sound effects and captions, Andrew Cabot added something else: decisions. And that brings us to the part that most people missed: the signal inside the silence and what it says about leverage, law, and long-term control. Silence isn't empty here. It's positioning. When a story turns into a public referendum, every word becomes evidence and every sentence becomes leverage for someone else. By refusing to narrate the blow-by-blow, he kept 3 things intact: optionality, credibility, and timing. No quote can be misquoted if it doesn't exist. There's also the legal math. Statements made in the heat of a scandal can read like admissions later. They can complicate negotiations, feed discovery, and turn a private dispute into a public exhibit. Choosing action over explanation keeps the record clean. Notices served, access changed, counsel engaged. That's not stonewalling, that's preserving the board position in a game everyone else is playing like checkers. Then there's brand risk. When you run a company, you're never just speaking for yourself. One emotional paragraph online can become a policy problem at work. He skipped the therapy post and chose a transaction trail instead. Assets stabilized, affiliations clarified. The message to investors and employees wasn't "feel for me," it was "operations continue." Silence also denies oxygen to the meme economy. Algorithms feast on back and forth. A clapback invites a rebuttal, which invites a pile-on, which becomes a loop. Breaking that loop looks like restraint, but it's really control. He set the tempo: no broadcast, no escalation, no free headlines. If you're looking for where he broke silence, you won't find it in a microphone. You'll find it in moves: titles updated, permissions revised, paper filed. Each step says what a statement would only try to. Lines were crossed, consequences follow, and the future will be handled in documents, not DMs. The signal is bigger than a marriage. To boards, policy outweighs personality. To partners, contracts outlive chaos. To the internet, he won't audition for a role in its courtroom. It reads cold only if you mistake clarity for cruelty. In reality, it's a strategy built to hold under pressure. And that's why The Quiet landed louder than any press tour. He didn't argue with a stadium screen. He made it irrelevant to what came next. So where does this actually land, and what's left once the views fade and the paperwork is done? One stadium moment set the internet on fire. Names were attached, roles were scrutinized. A company moved from whispers to warnings in a single work week. And while everyone argued online, Andrew Cabot never auditioned for the feat. He answered with decisions. The pattern was simple: actions instead of adjectives. Titles changed, access tightened, profiles went quiet. A paper trail replaced a press tour. It felt cold because it was clear, and clarity can cut sharper than any statement. The rest became content. Memes made the moment bigger. Re-uploads made it profitable. But views don't settle anything that matters. Documents do, policies do, choices do. So what does the silence say? That power isn't always loud, that the cleanest message is sometimes the one you don't hear but can't miss, and that in a world obsessed with the clip, the final word still lives on paper. When a life gets projected onto a jumbotron, you can chase the narrative, or you can control the consequences. He chose the second. The question that lingers is the one we all have to answer. If your worst 10 seconds went global, would you talk or would you move?